to our community Bible study. This will be shown on Thursday, September the 23rd. We are continuing our reading in Genesis. We've moved to chapter 30 and 31. And this is about the conflict between Jacob and his father-in-law Laban. You know, Jacob had gone to find a wife, and he found two, Leah and Rachel. And there's this play back and forth between Jacob and Laban. And Jacob was there about 20 years. And we'll hear a little more about the story. But the main idea is there's four of them. One is that between Jacob and Laban, the trust level got less and less. The distrust was growing. Jacob increased his own flocks by tricking Laban because Laban wasn't treating him properly. So he makes sure he gets compensated. Jacob, you know, has pulled tricks before. And then Jacob leaves to return home to Canaan, and God intervenes so that there's not bloodshed in that leaving. And then there's a little bit of we see in here the emphasis on the one true God versus the gods of the other peoples around them. So Genesis 30, we'll begin with verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, that was Jacob's 11th son, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I'll pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I've been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" Laban said. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all of your flocks today and remove any speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages." So you see, he's willing to take the imperfect ones and leave Laban with the unblemished ones. Jacob says, "My honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you pay me, any goat in my possession that's not speckled or spotted, or lamb that's not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." Well, now we're not going to read all of what happens in the next part of this chapter, but let me just tell you what happens. Laban, after he struck that agreement with Jacob, where Jacob would take the blemished animals, Laban would keep the others. Before Jacob could go out and find those blemished animals, Laban removed them from the flock, sent his sons to take them and move them far away, so Jacob wouldn't find any blemished animals, or very few. So Laban already was being dishonest about the agreement. So what happens is then Jacob realizes that Laban is not being truthful with him. So Jacob decides he needs to take matters into his own. So he goes through this elaborate routine where he manipulates the animals. They take the blemished ones. He manipulates where the strong ones, instead of giving birth to animals with no blemishes, they have more and more blemishes. And so Jacob ends up pulling more and more sheep and goats out of the flock for himself. Jacob flourishes and becomes prosperous. And Laban's value either stays the same or probably becomes less. I don't know the amount of time that's involved here, but obviously there's several cycles of birth and rebirth with the animal. So it's over a period of months at least. So now we go to chapter 31. What's going to happen now? Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob's taken everything our father owned and gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. So Jacob's thinking, it's time to leave. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob immediately, I added that word, sent word to Rachel and Leah, his wives, to come out to the fields where the flocks were. That way they would not be overheard by the family. He said to them, I see your father's attitude is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. If he said the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young with streaks on them. So God has taken away your father's livestock and giving them to me. And then he explains a little more about the breeding season and how that has worked. And then he says, the angel of the Lord spoke to me in a dream. Jacob, I answered, here I am. He said, look up and see that all the male goats mating are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I've seen what Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. So God says, now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Well, Rachel and Leah are also disturbed about what's been happening. So they say, do we still have any share of the inheritance in our father's estate? Does he regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he's used up what he paid for us. So they expected to have gotten something, and now that's gone. Surely the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. So they're going to go along with him. So Jacob put his children, his wives on the camels. He drove all the livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated, so he could go back to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. So basically, they're leaving without saying goodbye. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Now, we'll stop here for a second. Household gods, if you've seen pictures of things that archaeologists have dug up in the Middle East, there are a lot of little figurines, and many of the different religious cultures worshipped, some are fertility gods, some are gods for this, some are gods for that. And many of the pagan religions of that time, they would keep probably small, some were large, but mostly they were fairly small figurines, and they might be in a special place in one's house, and they could easily be taken with you if you wanted to, if you were moving about. And this is the point where it becomes clear that Jacob, who's followed his father Isaac and grandfather Abraham, believe in the one God, Yahweh, the Lord God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this separates them from those who are worshiping many different gods. It also is a temptation to so many of those Israelites, the followers of the one God, to maybe hold on to some of those other practices as well. So here we see where Rachel, I don't know whether those were important to her, those little God figurines, or whether she was getting back at her father. That's a possibility too. But anyway, instead of just leaving clean slate, she goes and steals some of the household gods. So Jacob then deceives Laban because he doesn't tell him that he's running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River and headed for the hill country of Gilead. So he's making as clean a getaway as he can. Well, Laban comes back. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled, taking his relatives with him. If you picture an old Western where they gather up a posse to go after them, this is what's happening. Laban pursues Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. So here they are. And this is a possible volatile, dangerous situation. So God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." So Laban is warned. Well, Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead, sort of in between Iraq and Israel, where he's headed, probably somewhere in what we would say is today's Syria. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You deceived me. You carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me? So I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps. You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing." Oh, he's threatening him. "I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household." So it's like he's going to accept that. "But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answers why he left. "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live." Ooh, that was dangerous, because Jacob didn't know that anyone had taken them. He thought this was part of Laban's trick, but it wasn't. Jacob says, "In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it." Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen the gods, the figurines. So Laban goes into Jacob's tent and looks around to Leah's tent, to the tent of the servants, found nothing. Then he went to Rachel's tent. Well, we know Rachel had taken those household gods, but she put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them to hide them. So Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. And Rachel says to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord. I cannot stand in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched, but he couldn't find the gods, so she kept them hid. Well, when they finished that, Jacob was angry, and he took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he said to Laban. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down?" Oh, now he's kind of getting back at Laban. "Now that you've searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them be the judge between the two of us." Jacob goes on, "I've been with you for 20 years. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor I have eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals that were torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever might have been stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes." So he's talking about how hard a life he has had working for Laban. He says, "It was like this for 20 years. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks. And you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Well, Laban answers, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are mine. All you see is mine, yet what can I do today? So Laban says, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness. So they do what we have read before. It was common in those days. Jacob set a stone and made a pillar out of it, and then the relatives gathered stones, and together they made a heap of them. Jacob called it, I'm not even going to pronounce it. Laban called it something. Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Basically, it becomes a borderline. This is why it's called Gilead. It was also called Mitzpah, M-I-Z-P-A-H, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. That's actually a Mitzpah prayer that sometimes we use today. May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we're away from each other. And Laban says, if you mistreat my daughters or take any other wives, even though no one is with us, remember God is a witness between you and me. Oh, he's laying it on heavy. So Laban said, here is this heap, here is this pillar that I have set up between you and me. The heap is a witness, the pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side, and you will not go past the heap to my side to harm me. And then he says, because he knows this is important, may the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice in the hill country, invited his relatives to a meal. After they'd eaten, they spent the night. And then early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. And then he left and returned home. It's interesting, the names always have meaning. Gilead, which is what Jacob calls the spot where they put up this sort of mound of stones. Gilead comes from the Hebrew, a heap of stones, and also can mean a witness. So this is the witness of the agreement. There was no contract or fences put up or anything else, but this was the witness that we agreed, you're on that side, I'm on this side, I won't harm you, you won't harm me, I will take care of your children. And then Mitzpah also is Hebrew, and a watchtower or a lookout. And then we're going to go back to Bethel in a little while, and Bethel is the house of God. And so those names mean a lot. So here we have, God has rewarded Jacob, and Jacob, in spite of doing some tricks back and forth, Jacob generally is, he's the one who's having to hold Laban accountable, and he is returning now home. Now this is 20 years after he left. We know, and we'll read next week, about him getting ready to meet Esau, who 20 years before threatened his life. And he's still going to be afraid of that. But Jacob has done well. He has 4 wives. He has flocks of sheep and goats. He has camels. He has accumulated quite a bit of wealth. And God has blessed him as he returns home. So remember, at this point, Jacob has 11 sons and 1 daughter, and they'll have a 12th son a little bit later. These, of course, become the 12 leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, I don't recommend engaging in Jacob's trickery, but it is a good sign that God forgives and works through him in spite of all these things. May the Lord watch over you this week until we meet again. God bless you.